Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the E-commerce Revolution video podcast. And we're doing video because I think it's great that we can see each other. My name is Ramin, and I'm going to go with my last name today because we've got a guest who has an equally, it's not as hard as mine, but we had a little chuckle about this. My name is Ramin Ramhermozi. I'm the managing partner of SKU Agency. Our goal each and every episode of this video podcast is to educate and entertain. And yes, we're definitely going to try to entertain you on all things e-commerce. So let's get things started today.
This is just the beginning.
So today we have a great topic for you. It isn't one of the sexiest topics in e-commerce, but it's one of the most important. It's something that every merchant in e-commerce needs. You can't do business without it. And it's payment processing. I can't wait to dive into this topic because as a merchant previously, back in the day, I had all kind of questions about merchant processing that I could never get answered. And I think I'm going to try to get them answered today, okay? Our guest has over 12 years of experience in the payment processing industry. So I think he knows a few things here. Working for major payment processors, he now runs and owns his own company called Vector Payments, and he's done that for the last 5 years. They specialize in the high-risk merchant side of the payment processing industry, taking care of clients in the CBD space, tobacco, supplements, and firearms, just to name a few. And there's a lot of other ones. You can take a look at his site. We'll put, he'll be able to tell us a little bit about his site, about his business once he comes on. He's an incredibly knowledgeable person in the industry. And the minute I met him, I thought, I've got to have this guy on the podcast. This guy knows way too much. We got to bottle it up and get it on and tell everybody about it. And on top of it, turns out, much like me, he's a Persian American. So that's, I love that part of it. That's a fantastic side of it as well. So without any further ado, please welcome Ryan Mirpanah. Ryan, thank you very much for coming on the podcast. How are you today?
I appreciate the opportunity. I'm doing very well. How are you?
I am doing great. I love doing these podcasts, and I'm serious when I tell you that payment processing is something that is, I'm just fascinated by it because it's so complex and there's so much that's going on in there. So I love it.
Well, that's probably putting it lightly. You know, there's especially these days when you get crypto involved and a lot of different pieces. I think a lot causes a lot of people's hair to really continuously stand up on the back of their neck. So we try to solve those problems and eliminate those issues.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, taking a look at your site, I saw one of the selling propositions is simplifying the payment experience. So today, can you just simplify the complex world of payment processing for us and just give us a glimpse? Who are the stakeholders? How does it all work? Who's connected? It may be, you may need a chart behind you, to draw it all out, but maybe you could just, in your own words, kind of explain how it all works.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we do have drawing paint back here. So, I could really show you my stick figures and all that. But no, to really keep it simple, I think the industry and most people that are involved in payments, whether directly in my field or as a merchant, probably know of the main 3 to 4 groups, and that's Stripe for online, Square for in-person, and they're, gradually going online as well. PayPal, obviously everybody knows or should know at this point in regards to payment processing. So those companies are called aggregates. And what that means, layman terms, is third-party processors. And that's why every single time when you buy from any of the merchants that are underneath their belt, you see SP asterisk for Stripe. You see SQ asterisk for Square, you see PY asterisk for PayPal, and that's because their company was actually the company that was underwritten by the bank that they work with. Wells Fargo is actually the largest sponsor bank, which is what's required to sponsor sales in the country. A lot of people don't realize that.
No, I had no idea. Wow.
Yeah. And I know some people might not like Wells Fargo from, the negativity from a few years ago with all the signups, but I think they paid they paid their fair share for what they did. Sure did. So, that's probably still questionable to an extent, but that's a different probably podcast in itself. But really what those guys are is they're aggregates. And, the reason why there's a lot of frustrations with those companies is because they approve everybody. You sign up, you get approved pretty much, unless you're in a country that they just don't work with. The issue is once you run your first card, that's when they review what you're selling. that's what they review, more information about yourself, like running your social, doing different pieces. And that's why a lot of the times, especially in high risk verticals, like CBD is a big one right now that's out there, but really any of the verticals that you mentioned, during the intro of this podcast here, they all get frozen, meaning funds are held. You can't really get a hold of anybody, that's with any of those organizations, because it's really kind of a new school fintech where it's all online, submit a ticket, and, they'll get back to you maybe in a few days. So those are a lot of those issues. As much as everybody wants simple and get it done fast, I mean, trust me, I'm a New Englander. I'm impatient through and through, just like everybody else in my area. But
that's great. Is that what New Englanders are known for? Yeah,
pretty much. Yeah,
okay.
Pretty much. Whenever we go out west and honk the horn, people are like, "What the heck is that noise?" Whereas us, if we don't hear a horn, it's it's a different conversation. But those groups are probably the largest. But those are definitely some of the difficulties, is they don't do proper underwriting up front. Whereas all the more, I wouldn't say legitimate, but more traditional type of processing banks, they do the underwriting up front, so you don't have to worry about those risks after the fact, which is typically the worst time when you're trying to make money, right?
Okay.
And, there's a lot of difficulties in this world these days. Last thing you want is to be kind of, bootstrapped or, shackled there to where you can't actually accept payment from customers.
Sure.
Does all that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it probably, diagramming it one day, well, maybe we can put up something for the viewers to see, but, it's a complex industry. There's no doubt about it. I mean, there are definitely a lot of players that, that the transaction goes through. Tell me about Authorize.net, and how does Authorize.net, being a gateway, if I remember correctly, how do they fit into the mix of the merchant processing side? And are they a company that you guys work with regularly?
Yeah, good question. So essentially what Authorize.net's an online gateway, as you mentioned. A gateway is an online terminal. So gateway equals online terminal for layman's terms. Biggest example of it is, kind of like PayPal, where you can integrate it right to your site, but it's a separate company. So really what we do is, no matter the business type that's out there, once we submit your application and get you approved, we take the codes and then we program it into Authorize.net. So it is one of the roughly 5 or 6 gateways that we integrate for our clients. Personally, I like Authorize.net. They're, not probably the sleekest type of setup. They haven't put tons into their dev work, but it doesn't matter what type of car you have, as long as it gets you from point A to point B. So,
right.
Some people might say otherwise. They like the more flashier stuff, but in the end, who cares, as long as it accepts payment from your customers and you get paid, which is the most important piece from a gateway.
Yeah.
But the bigger reason why I like them is because they're owned by Visa. So having, the Corleone of the card family, supporting it, which Visa is the largest in the world, when it comes to payment processing, but definitely the largest in our country. Typically, if you're taking 100 cards, roughly about 65% of them are going to be Visa cards, whether debit or credit.
Wow.
So, having that security behind it has really made it one of the more impenetrable type of gateways in regards to all the hacking that's going on these days. I mean, Robinhood was just announced the other day that they got hacked, and a lot of data was stolen. So, nobody's out of the limelight of really getting attacked these days. But I've been working with Authorize.net since day one, over 12 years ago now. And, I couldn't tell you one thing that's ever occurred in regards to issues with that organization. So, definitely they're a great gateway, simple. You can do invoicing, you can do a free app and key in transactions if you're on the go, like trade shows and whatnot. There's mobile readers available as well. But obviously the direct API integration, which you know about very well, can be seamlessly attached to Shopify, WordPress, WooCommerce, BigCommerce, and really majority of the platforms that are out there as a web setup.
Yeah, I got to say they've done a great. I mean, I remember them back in 2003 when I launched my first e-commerce business, or my second one at that point. It was, their name. I mean, they've been around forever, and it's great to know that they're a go-to for businesses like yours as well out there. That's great. So tell me, if you could. So that Skew Agency primarily does Shopify work. We do design, development, growth marketing on Shopify, and Shopify has its own payment processing system. They're, I believe, powered by Stripe. Tell me how, vector payments fits into the mix, especially when it comes down to some of these industries that maybe Shopify will allow you to sell your product on Shopify, but they won't take the payments, because Stripe is pretty strict, aren't they? They're, they have a threshold. They won't touch high risk, right? And that's probably where you guys come in.
That's 100% correct. Yeah. And that kind of goes back to the beginning piece that I mentioned with the aggregate and Wells Fargo. Stripe uses Wells Fargo as really their main sponsor bank. And just to kind of let you know what I mean by sponsor bank is nobody really knows this, but on the well, unless you're in payments, at least I would hope you would know this if you're in payments. But, really how it works when it's all said and done, a consumer puts their card online or inserts it in a terminal. Within a couple seconds, it's approved, and that's it, right? On the back end, there's about 10 different pieces that go on. The most important piece, though, is there's a sponsor bank that is integrated to any of the payment platforms that are out there. The three that I mentioned.
Right.
First Data is the largest processor in the country for low risk processing. So all of those companies utilize a sponsor bank. And essentially what that is the sponsor bank, they have essentially registered with the card brands to be able to sponsor each one of their cards as a transaction from the cardholders.
Okay.
So they are essentially saying, hey, we support X transaction with X business. That's why not every bank supports every type of business vertical. For instance, Wells Fargo and Stripe, as you mentioned, they're not okay with majority of the high risk verticals out there.
Right.
Like supplements, big one is CBD right now as well that, we've done some business together with. So, that's some of the challenges. But, when it comes to Shopify payments directly, you're 100% correct. They use Stripe. They're more kind of the low risk types of setups. If, Ryan selling his custom made t-shirts, that's where I would probably use Shopify payments because it's a simple setup.
Right.
But Shopify doesn't work with any high risk vertical, really everything that you touched on in the intro. But just take CBD for an example as kind of a newer vertical. If a lot of people aren't familiar with CBD, probably have seen it, or most of you are, but it's derived from hemp. It's not cannabis or marijuana, but it's CBD. But because it is such a very new vertical, majority of the main sponsor banks do not support it. So where we come in, say, if Ryan has his own CBD business, but it's through Shopify and SKU agency, help me build it out. Shopify doesn't care more or less what you're selling on the site within reason, right?
Sure.
But CBD, they don't really care what you're selling on their platform. You just can't use Shopify payments powered by Stripe.
Right.
So where I come in is I would get the website approved. Authorized on that's one of the gateways that do integrate seamlessly to the Shopify checkout page. As you know, but maybe a lot of people that are paying attention.
Absolutely.
They don't realize that a lot of gateways have been kind of crossed off by Shopify since they brought their own payments platform.
Right.
So, but authorized on that's probably the best that's out there. And we seamlessly integrate. So, we take the problem that, Shopify's done a great job in regards to solving an online platform problem, because WordPress was probably the largest out there, but, they're a little more old school. Sorry, my light will turn on and off from here and there. It's the ghost turning lights on, but,
no worries.
Really we come in, we get the integration directly. So it's more or less the same exact type of setup if you were to go directly with Shopify payments. And there's no difference to what any of the consumers that are transacting on your site would see. It's not Shopify payments. It's vector payments for this example through authorized.net.
Right. Okay. So tell me about these, industries like CBD, the high risk industries. Is there an industry that it was high risk that would ever come out of that classification of high risk, or once they're deemed high risk, that's the end of it? They're in that bucket and they don't ever come out?
It's a great question. To an extent, if you're in high risk, you're typically never going to leave it. And a lot of people forget that are familiar with CBD that less than 3 years ago, this was still a Schedule 1 narcotic and a federally illegal product.
Absolutely amazing.
Crazy as that was, for hemp that, doesn't technically get you high because legal CBD is below 0.3% THC content, and that I don't even think would get a baby high, so it's not something that really should have been.
Don't try to get your babies high, people.
Yes, don't give CBD to kids or do tests. But that was maybe a wrong joke. But
no, it's
in regards, in regards to that process, I don't think so. I mean, we'll see. I think it will change as cannabis does. Actual marijuana does creep closer to federal legalization, which we're getting there. I think a lot of people thought it would be by now once the Biden administration went in. But anybody that knows these industries knows nothing goes fast, especially when politics gets involved from a revenue standpoint. But I would tell you maybe, but we're probably 5 years away from it being deemed low risk.
Okay.
But I mean, I would also tell you that from a pricing standpoint, it's not far off from low risk. And,
Mm-hmm.
if you're processing pretty good volume,
Mm-hmm.
I can get you priced as cheap as a low risk account because it's all about working with the right processing partner. And
Right.
I work with all of them that are
Okay.
in the country right now that are knowingly servicing, say, the CBD industry for this example.
Right.
So, really what I do is if, say, you have a CBD business, you come to me and you've seen this firsthand from your referrals.
Mm-hmm.
What I do is I qualify the customer.
Mm-hmm.
I find out what they're selling. I'll make sure to, do my checklist on which sponsor banks would work with X type of products to ensure this is efficient, right? Nobody has time for inefficiencies, period. There's enough of them out
Sure.
there these days. So, making sure that we place them with the right home, but we can definitely get aggressive. So it's kind of a gray area response in regards to the high risk because you can still get competitive from a price standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
But, I will also say 5 years ago when I just got into this industry, prices median was probably close to 7%.
Wow.
Now it's closer to 4.
Wow.
So it really has
Okay.
dropped off over the years.
Okay. Wow. That's very interesting. And you actually, that was one of my questions that, if I'm a CBD merchant and I come to you, whether I come through an agency, I'm referred by an agency, or I just find you, I assume you do online advertising. So, you have a lead generation system, you're finding people coming that way. What's the first step? And it sounds like qualification. So before you even go anywhere else, before you do anything else, you need to qualify, right? You need to make sure that this is going to work. So nobody's time is wasted, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And that's what we do. So we'll qualify people. I mean, the typical pricing that's out there from where we go to market is right under 4%, but there's no setup fees, no reserve, no contract, which is how it should be.
Sure.
Make sure that we put our money where our mouth is with what we tell every one of our clients.
Mm-hmm.
And each one of the clients, and again, you can attest to this as well, will have access to my cell phone. It's my personal cell phone because business doesn't stop Monday through Friday at 5 p.m.
Don't call him after hours. That let him eat his dinner at night at least.
Yeah, I do take a few hours off, every day. But that in regards to the process flow that we have, I really do try to keep it simple for everybody. But that's really the bottom line: is lowest overall cost, supporting people. It's a very simple formula to keep them happy, and we handle everything else from there.
That's great. And just let's take that 4% number, and I think it's it's an interesting point because I think some merchants actually jump into e-commerce. Maybe it's the CEO driving the efforts, but they don't really know the details of what they're being charged on the payment processing side. So if you're a low risk and you're going through Shopify payments, you're probably paying somewhere in the neighborhood of 2.9% plus 30 cents a transaction. But you're in the high risk side, you're looking at more like 4%. You're probably in a booming industry. I mean, like CBD booming. So, and you have, your choices are unfortunately limited. So that's where a company like yours comes in. I mean, you can help facilitate this whole thing, make the process easier, onboard, but you're paying a higher percentage rate. And that's just the way it is. That has to be like that, right? Because it's a high risk industry. So there's no way around that, correct?
That is correct. However, there's also higher margins in those types of verticals for, say, the CBD merchant.
Yes.
So, you kind of take the good with the bad that's out there. But yes, it is a little bit more expensive. But, really, I think most people that especially have been in the CBD space, to keep that example with that vertical for more than a couple of years, that went through the gauntlet, 4, 5, 6, 7 years ago, where, you would get terminated constantly, funds would be held. And the reason why funds are held is because typically the sponsor bank doesn't know what you're actually selling. Even if your sales agent told them, hey, it's one product.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of sales agents lie. That's why a lot of people don't like payments companies, because they bait and switch. They tell you what you want to hear. And that's why, truthfully, I left my corporate position. I had a very comfortable position, but I wasn't comfortable with how they would treat small to medium businesses and local businesses that really drive our economy. Especially we see enough about big companies not paying taxes. So who's paying all these taxes? It's the people you don't read in the news. So, that's why I left, and transparency. I'd rather lose a deal by being upfront over things with somebody as a competitor, just telling you what you want to hear, than just telling you what you want to hear. So that's something you'll never have to worry with me. I tell you the facts, not just what wants to go into the ear there.
Well, I think that's great. I mean, again, complex industry, a lot of unknowns, right? Especially if I'm coming into it for the first time, and if I'm in a high risk side of things, I need help, right? I need to know everything. And if you have that hand-holding approach, really the education, which I think is incredibly important, something I noticed when you and I talked. I mean, I thought I knew a few things about payment processing, but apparently I didn't know enough. Really, just in the 30 minutes that we had a conversation, I learned a lot more than I did before. So no, I think that's really important. And part of this podcast is to make sure we're educating people on that side of it. So tell me, we talked about CBD, and maybe let's broaden it a little bit. Just talk about cannabis in general. You seem to have knowledge just because this is an area where you service, an industry that you service. Where do you see just the cannabis industry from a commerce standpoint in the next 5 years? Is it what do you think is going to happen?
That's the $1 million question. And I tell most people, if you actually know, let me know the Powerball numbers Wednesday or Saturday, so I can be a 100 millionaire, because the future. But it's a tough response. I mean, when I joined the industry, because I've been in CBD and cannabis really since day one. When I left my company, just saw an opportunity to get in emerging markets, and I support the products. I've seen firsthand what it's done to people that have that are epileptic and have issues that don't want to take the generic pills, and I don't blame them. I think we're over the 5 years. Kind of part one to your question here is we're gonna start gradually seeing the stigma of the Cheech and Chong mentality when you think of marijuana to medicine. And as much as you laugh and I do too. It's a fact, that's out there, and I think we've just been honed into our brain so much that, take an Advil or take a Tylenol or, go to the doctor and get whatever they prescribe to you. But, the reality of it is, John down the street that was maybe giving you a bag on the side that you probably shouldn't have done, realistically, was getting towards the right direction. Yeah. Obviously, I always recommend going through the legal aspects of it, which is dispensaries, because it's tested, you know exactly what's in the products. Right. Not to say that, the products from John down the street aren't also grown by the same farmer. You don't really know these days. Yeah. But,
questionable if it is. Yeah. I'm sure John has, who knows who his sources are.
Yeah. And if you're a John that's going to listen to this, don't worry. I'm not calling you out, but, in regards to the rest, I do see the Safe Banking Act passing. I would be surprised if it doesn't pass next year. We are going into an election year with the every few years next year for a lot of Congress that's out there. So it'll be interesting to see if that delays it or pushes it forward, because people need some more votes. It's really a big up in the air question mark right now. I would tell you that, I was at a conference last month with some of the largest CEOs in the cannabis space, and they don't want this to be legalized anytime soon. I can tell you that much. Yeah. Wow. I think a part of it is because they're just, like a massive whale when there's, a bunch of small fish, they just open their mouth and all just flies in. Because you're seeing it already. There's a lot of major mergers and acquisitions that are going on. And I think when it does legalize, the bigger organizations like the Walgreens, the CVS's, the whoever else's of the world, they will then start dabbling. Whereas right now it's more or less a piranha pit for the actual large MSOs, which are multi-state operators, like True Leave, which is a major operator, Curaleaf, which is a major operator. There's about probably 8 to 10 major MSOs in the country that collectively have probably north of 500 dispensaries nationwide, if not more than that. So that, I think, is a little bit of the reason. And price points obviously will start to go down a little bit inherently with more competition. But 5 years from now, there's a chance we're legalized. I think, step one is the Safe Banking Act, so they can at least bank all this legal cannabis money. Step two is people that are in prison for marijuana related, charges is asinine. You need to get people out. If they have other charges that has gone underneath their belt too, then sure, they don't deserve to be out. But, if John that used to sell down the street got caught with half an ounce and he's in jail for 2 years, that's just the stupidest thing ever. So, I think that is a big thing that needs to be focused besides the Safe Banking Act, and then just decriminalizing it. Personally, I don't think we should be an adult use recreational country. I don't think I think that should be state mandated, which I think they will end up doing. I think, federally, this should be medicinally approved. But I think Big Pharma has a big say in that, which is why that hasn't happened as well. So, you know, they're
Yeah.
obviously preparing to get in. They might also be one of those big acquirers of an MSO that I was just mentioning. But,
Right.
I think over the next 5 years, it'll be those three pieces: safe banking, decriminalization, which means releasing a lot of people for kind of smaller marijuana related
Mhm.
crimes, and then also kind of seeing which part federally will this be legalized medicinally and adult use, or just medicinally.
Yeah, that's interesting. And interesting that the CEOs that you talk to are, they don't want to see it. I mean, and I get it because yes, what if Walgreens eventually becomes a dispensary, right? I mean, what if that happens? It takes a huge business away from them. So that I appreciate you sharing that. That's fascinating. So tell me, let's go back to the payment processing side. This is something that I've always wondered. Why the 2 to 3 business days at the end before it goes into your bank, or maybe it's 1 to 2? Why doesn't it go in instantly? It seems like if you can, swipe a credit card, or you can key in a card, or whatever you're doing, whether it be at the register or online, all this is happening instantly, right? All these checks are happening instantly. How come it takes so long for the money to go in the bank?
That's the biggest question that comes out, and the question for most merchants, and it's rightfully so. I
Yeah.
probably would have asked the same thing if I wasn't aware. Is I'm taking money from a customer. Why
Mhm.
why do I have to wait for my money?
Right.
Great question. And the reason is, when you apply for a merchant account,
Mhm.
essentially it's a no interest loan,
Mhm.
because a merchant account is truly a no interest loan, where that transaction, say $100, just to keep it simple,
Mhm.
is processed. At the end of the day, when it's batched out or settled, which means the total amount is sent to the processing bank,
Mhm.
the actual processor that you work with, they are loaning you that $100 to your account.
Oh, wow.
And then they have to wait, typically it's up to 30 days from that sponsor bank to refund them for that
Oh,
$100.
wow.
So so the reason why it takes typically a couple days is to, one, make sure that it is a fully approved transaction.
Mhm.
There's no issues there. But also, with each one of the processors that are out there, they do kind of settle to their banks at different
Mhm.
times. For instance, I mentioned First Data, which is one
Mhm.
of the largest low risk processors. If you don't batch out by 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time,
Mhm.
it's done. It's done for the day. So if you want next day
Wow.
funding, it has to be done before like 5:55 p.m.
Mhm.
Otherwise, it's not captured to their bank until the next business day.
Okay.
So that's the reason for the extra delay. So there's a couple pieces that go to it. It
Mhm.
starts with, really how that funding piece works, which not a lot of people are aware of.
Mhm.
But also, it depends on the time that you do actually batch or settle your actual, whether gateway or,
Mhm.
retail terminal or point of sale terminal. That all does depend, and each processor is different. So a lot of it is the batch time outside of the initial funding piece.
Interesting. Wow. All right. Well, that explains it. I mean, I understand it. I'm sure it's still frustrating to merchants. You like your money right away. Tell me about, and this is maybe touching on another area that is somewhat unknown. I mean, I think all merchants who are in e-commerce now know that it happens because it's happened to them. But the chargeback. Tell me about the chargeback and what's happening there. It's essentially seems like it's a reversal of everything that happened to get the transaction. It's going backwards because there was a dispute. Somebody's not happy with something. Well, give me the backstory on the chargeback and who are the stakeholders in that process?
Yeah, chargebacks are one of the biggest, I think, difficulties right now from a merchant standpoint.
Hmm.
10 years ago, if you were to dispute a charge, which is known in the industry as a chargeback,
Hmm.
you would have to fill out almost 10 pages worth of
I
documentation
remember
to show
that.
that you're not lying about it.
Yeah.
I had to do that once because somebody did have a fraudulent charge on my card. And I just said, you know what, I almost don't want to do this. It's 10
Right.
pages, it's ridiculous, but had a little bit more time 10 years ago to fill out the pages. But, you go to your credit card company now, they have a button literally at the top right that says dispute a
That's it.
transaction,
Yeah.
And why is that? Because they make tons of money on us cardholders. Every time you use that card, it's not them giving you 5% or 3% rewards because they like you. No offense. No, they don't care about any of us, right? They
Wow.
just care that we keep swiping.
Hmm.
It's called an interchange rate, which is their charge to each one of the merchants. When you use, say, an American Express card because you love those points
Hmm.
and you get those points, no merchant loves an American Express because they typically charge upwards of 3 to 3.5% per transaction to the actual merchants
Okay.
to give those rewards. So I went off on a little side tangent from the chargeback there, but in regards to a chargeback, how it works, I run $100, through your company. For whatever reason, I'm not happy with it, and I don't take the 2 minutes to reach out to you first, and I hit the dispute button. I typically will get my $100 back by my credit card or by my bank while the actual dispute review goes through. And that's really where it just adds a lot of extra work for merchants because number one, especially if you ship the product, now you have to submit the documentation that you shipped it with the tracking proof. You have to upload a receipt, whether it's from the online gateway or from the terminal or point of sale to show proof of the purchase. And you really have to explain to a third party that you don't really have any relation to is, hey, this is a legitimate transaction. This customer legitimately bought this product from me, so this should be a fought dispute. And more often than not, you win. A lot of American Express time, they side with the cardholders a lot of the time, which is why a lot of merchants don't accept American Express for that reason and because they're more expensive. But, disputes and chargebacks are the biggest problem I have with my own industry because I think it's unfair to a lot of the merchants that are out there that are legitimately servicing, whether it's a service, no product, or it's a product sold. But, people just are people and do things without understanding the ramifications of it.
It is I'm very cautious. I personally, as a consumer, I don't push that button unless I am absolutely not getting anywhere with a merchant because I know what it's like to be on the other side. It's frustrating. It's too easy, in many ways it's too easy. And it's very consumer, it's there to protect the consumer. And I get that. That's not a bad thing. We should protect the consumers, but there also should be protection for the merchants. I mean, these are small businesses that are working really hard. So I appreciate you explaining that. And I'm sure most people probably when they log in, they see that button, but they don't know what to, on their credit card, they don't know what to do, but they have rights, correct? I mean, they can enact the chargeback if absolutely necessary to them if they're not getting anywhere with the merchant.
And that's the big thing. I mean, technically, if you are merchants that are listening here, there's 6 months from the date that transaction goes through that most cards allow any customer to dispute and request a chargeback.
6 months. Okay.
Up to 6 months. Amex can extend it a little bit more because Amex does what they want. But, it's typically 6 months for Visa, MasterCard, Discover. Now, more often than not, if a dispute's going to occur because people use their cards so much nowadays that, you're not going to go back 3 months. So typically a dispute occurs within the first 60 days. But, a big recommendation I have for both sides of the table between merchants and cardholders, as a cardholder, if you have a frustrated charge or something going on, reach out to the business owner first. Reach out. If they're not, if they're being jerks or they're not listening to you or they're not willing to help, especially every online business has a refund policy, which is required by the card brands on the website. You can go there, take 30 seconds, and review what their refund policy is. If it says they take back products within X amount of days and you're within X amount of days and they're not willing to do it and they're not willing to help you, then, your decision is to dispute it at that point.
That's great.
If they're not willing to do it.
Great advice. Great advice. Yeah. I mean, it's funny. I mean, the phone number, correct, for most merchants is on the credit card transaction. So a consumer can easily see how to reach them, or they can at least see the website so they know what it is, right?
Exactly. It's just putting a little extra time, and I can understand if a card holder doesn't understand the other side of the table, like you and I do. But the example I can give that maybe some others can relate is if you were a waiter or waitress in the past. You don't know that you're making $2.47 an hour or whatever it is. If you're going out to eat, give people a tip. If they're a terrible waiter or waitress, then, give them 5%. But, that's their bottom line. You don't know what people are going through, right? So maybe they're just having a bad day. But, going out and not tipping and somebody's making $3 an hour, anybody paying attention to the news is seeing the increase in inflation and everything else from consumer goods. I think it was a 7% increase year over year.
Yeah.
I mean, that's absurd. So, that's kind of the example that I give, in regards to a merchant to card holder is put yourself in a waiter's or waitress shoes. Be kind to them, understand they might be busy and give them a tip if they deserve it because they don't make a lot of money. Same thing on the other side of the table. A lot of small to medium businesses have been drastically impacted the last 18 months, more than anybody can ever fathom and more than anybody's ever seen in years past with COVID, so take a few minutes, reach out to them. If there's an issue with a product or service, give them the chance to be able to help you.
Absolutely.
And that's my biggest piece of advice from a cardholder standpoint. And, for merchants, if there's a dispute, you need to respond immediately. Typically you have 7 days from the day that dispute occurs. And, if you're working with me, I help you with it.
Great.
If you're working with other companies, you should leave them and work with me. But, besides that, it's, not a lot of them help, and not a lot of them let you know. If you don't respond in 7 days, the case is ripped up and you lose.
Wow.
Which means the money's taken out. You get charged a chargeback fee, which is typically $25 to $50, depending on the industry you're in. And it's even more impactful. It's a negative kind of number on your actual processing history. And if you have over 2% of your sales in chargebacks, there's maybe 3 companies in this country that would approve you for a merchant account, unless you're doing over $100,000 a month. Which means if you're under 100,000 and you have over 2% chargebacks, you're not getting approved to process cards.
Wow.
So it's very important to stay on top of chargebacks.
So they are keeping score, essentially. They're keeping track, and that is how they keep track. If you are a legitimate merchant, if you are, doing the things you need to do as a merchant to stay in business, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Just like, if you have too many inquiries on your credit goes down, and that looks bad if you're trying to get a loan or anything. Same thing with card processing. If your processing history is not clean, meaning, you have a lot of chargebacks, over 2% is not very clean, but there's also certain things. If you've had a bad month, or you were hit with a spam attack or something, because you're using the wrong gateway for security, as we mentioned before, that's why I really like authorized.net. That's one-off. That's a unique situation. Now, if you're drop shipping products and they're coming from international, everybody that's paid, 2 seconds of attention to the news knows there's a lot of worldwide logistics issues right now, and it's not going to be fixed anytime soon. Some of the largest shipping companies have said this might be fixed by Q2. That's 6 months away, right? So do your Christmas and holiday shopping now, people, because it's not going to be last minute shopping you can do this year. But, those are the issues. It might take a month to drop ship internationally.
Right.
And that's an issue. So, it's definitely, it's important to stay on top of everything, and communication, just like in a healthy relationship, communicate with your customers.
Right.
If they know, then, more often than not, they'll be okay with it, unless they just like to complain about everything.
No, that's great. So tell me, fraud is a big topic, and probably one that we could spend an entire podcast talking about. But maybe are there 1 or 2 tips that you can provide a merchant to protect themselves? What to look out for? Are there any patterns that they should look for when you're hoping the gateway helps you in the process, and it disqualifies anybody whose CVV number doesn't match, or their address doesn't match? But what can a merchant do if with their own eyes?
Yeah. Well, number one, the biggest thing is, and this is more on the merchant card processor you work with, but the DBA, the doing business as name, should always match up with the name that the customers are going to recognize. If you put your LLC name, like Ryan LLC, but your doing business as name is Vector Payments, they're not going to know who the heck Ryan LLC is, right? So, that could open up for, we call friendly fraud, which means they dispute a transaction they would have been aware of if you had the correct DBA as the credit card descriptor. So it should say Vector Payments, not Ryan LLC. So the DBA should always be the way. And even if you don't have a registered DBA with your state, which not a lot of people do, some states require it. Like my state, Massachusetts, does require it. If you want to have a DBA, you need a file. Otherwise, anybody could have Vector Payments. So I did file that DBA. But more often than not, from a merchant account standpoint, if you just take the URL, ryancbd.com, but it's not a DBA, just still put it on the application as Ryan CBD or ryancbd.com. So that's one big thing to kind of help prevent any type of fraud. But the bigger thing is to identify any types of fraudulent transactions. If you see a lot of similar types of purchases that come through, especially it's typically periodic, back to back to back to back, and typically it's really early in the morning, because a lot of it does happen, in Europe, and there's a lot of fraud, that's going on in a lot of the international countries. Obviously, it's here too, but a lot of the actual fraud spam attacks will come from India or Ukraine or some of the European countries that are there. So you want to just be careful. My big piece of advice, actually just yesterday, I talked with a client of mine that said they had somebody that wanted to buy $12,000 worth of product. And it was an international customer. And, they were excited because they were a smaller business. But,
Sure.
I'm really glad they reached out to me because the customer, I'm going to say this lightly because I don't know if they were a legitimate customer, but
Right.
they wanted them to pay $6,000 to go through a third-party shipping company of their choice and ship it to another address that's separate from the billing address.
Yeah.
I said no.
Yeah.
I said no.
Yeah.
You want to be very careful with that. And as exciting as seeing a $12,000 or $18,000 sale is, it's that much worse when you ship $12,000 worth of products and then get a dispute, which means you're out double, probably, at least 20 grand from what the costs are and everything else. And you're never going to get that back. Right. So, just being aware of abnormal types of transactions that are out there. And I'm not saying ignore large sales. I would trust domestic sales, US based or North American based sales a lot more than anything internationally, unless you know the person. Right. If you know the person, you've done business with them, that's obviously your decision to make. But those are really some of the biggest pieces to look out to is abnormal sales, a lot of similar size transactions that come out of nowhere, late night or early morning, depending on which part of the country you're located in, and just monitor them, because there's a lot of people, especially if you have a billing address and a different shipping address, that's where, technically it could open up for disputes and chargebacks. So, and not everybody does that. I buy things here and ship them to, my family's house for the holidays and things like that, so I don't have to lug everything with me. But, that is just a couple of things to just pay closer attention to. And, we have security settings that we implement on all of our gateways for our clients that, we can do it to where it's flagged for review, which means if there's an abnormal, as I mentioned, back to back to back to back from the same IP address, we can either deny it instantly because it's going to be fraud if it's that many back-to-back with the same IP, or we can just, flag for review, which means you have to physically go in, review it. If you feel comfortable, you can hit submit and it's all processed. Right. But it would still authorize a card, which authorize is like when you go to a hotel and there's the incidental charge that disappears as long as you don't ruin the hotel room. Right. That's what an authorization is. And then when you click that button, it captures the sale, which means it's fully charging the card. Okay.
Tell me about, in terms of authorizing and capturing right away versus just authorizing and waiting till the order is ready to ship. Do you see a lot more authorize and capture right away, or does it really depend on the industry, what they're selling, and what their shipping time frame is for a merchant?
I would tell you 98% of my clients are authorize and capture, which means there's nothing extra that you have to do. It's immediately processed. Right. If you're doing, say, a custom order, like I have some packaging companies that, kind of do white labeled packaging for certain verticals for companies that ship their own products. So with that, you could authorize the sale because if it's a custom job, obviously it's not something that's automatically in place. You have to literally spend the time to do the art design and whatever it is. You want to make sure before you do all that work that you are going to get paid. Right. But you also want to make sure that you're not charging their card too far in advance, and then it might take an extra week or two than originally expected. So then they could dispute it. So if you authorize, it'll freeze that amount of money, say $5,000 order, freeze $5,000 on Vector Payments card, and typically it's for up to 30 days unless you go and capture it or if you request for that authorization to be removed. Okay. But again, it's pretty rare that authorize only is in place outside of, those types of unique services that are offered. Sure. But, so authorize and capture is about, I'd say 98% of it these days.
That's good. All right. That's good to know. And I think, because I'll tell you, like in Shopify, you're given that choice as a merchant, which one to select, and there's really no help button to tell you which one you should do and which one you shouldn't do. Tell me about, so if I'm a merchant, I come to Vector Payments, I sign up, you get me, all set up. Everything is, maybe I'm using Shopify as my e-commerce platform, and a year goes by and my business is really doing well and I'm processing a lot of payments. At what point do I come back and say, Ryan, I feel like my business is going well. I'd love to, is there a way to do what we used to call a rate review? I don't know if it's still considered, At what point do you look at a merchant's history and say, yeah, you know what, we can negotiate those rates?
Yeah, and it is still a rate review for sure. It's is the terminology there. So essentially, actually, what my organization already does is every 90 to 180 days, we monitor what's possible. So, majority of our agreements are month to month. Some of the higher risk verticals like firearms, you do typically have to put in a contract term, depending if you have processing history, because that's obviously kind of a unique vertical and subject these days. But that's a different conversation. But yeah, I mean, we go ahead and review it because with no contract, we have to make sure our services are there and make sure clients are always taken care of. So yeah, I mean, really, our goal is to give you the lowest overall cost commitment to the best of our ability, no matter the type of product you have. And really, we always tell people, hey, we'd be surprised if anybody comes close to this. But if you think there's something comparable out there, let me know. I'm happy to reach out to the bank if I haven't already and see if there's any wiggle room with any price point, whether it's $1 off the monthly fee or, a price reduction per transaction. Because every penny counts, especially in the crazy world we're living in right now.
Absolutely, no, that's great, fantastic. And while I said at the top of this top of this webinar that it's not the sexiest topic of e-commerce, it's the most important. I mean, you cannot do business. You cannot do business online without resolving or having a solid payment processing relationship. It just doesn't work unless I guess you're maybe taking a phone call and somehow doing it the old-fashioned way, which I don't even know what that would be, but you can't do it. So it's such an important topic and one that I feel a lot of merchants don't know enough about. Maybe sometimes, say, hey, I don't need to know, but I think it is good to know, how it all works. So tell me this. Being that it's such a complex industry, being that there are, some unknowns in that world from a merchant's perspective, are there any secrets that you can share with us today that are, that nobody really knows about, but maybe we should know about in the payment processing world?
No, I think you're breaking up there. So when you say secret, that's, not really. I mean, the biggest thing, really everything I've gone over is just kind of, I guess, secrets that most people don't tell merchants that I've told you to look out for when it comes to fraud. You've asked a lot of great questions when it's out there. But, the biggest thing that you want to make sure of is, no matter what anybody tells you out there, there's always another solution. So, if you feel like you're with the only provider that can work with you, I highly doubt that. So if you think if you're getting terrible service, if you think you're paying way too much, if, you're just curious what's out there, let me know. Speak to SKU agency. They'll introduce you to me and, whatever needs to get done. But, and I'll tell you, if there's nothing more that can be done, if you truly are with the only provider, I'm not going to waste your time, because time is money and everybody's busy, especially business owners, this day and age, especially. So, the secret out there is don't hesitate to ask the question because the worst thing they'll say is no, which is the same position you're in now. So, reach out and let us help.
I love it. And that's great. That's good. That's good to know. And I think that, it's seems to be a much, much more transparent industry than, 2003 when I got in. But I think back then, everybody's still trying to figure things out. No, e-commerce was still, I feel it's even still in its infancy now. We have so far to go, but back then, we were still working the details out. So it's great to hear that, you definitely vector payments and what you do, is bring education. And I think that really helps merchants navigate these complex waters. So let's before we wrap up, let's move on to a few fun questions. Okay. Not that what we just talked about wasn't fun. I found it to be, I love, I can't tell you enough how much I love to understand the payment processing world. So tell me, like, when what gets you excited every day to wake up and tackle? What one thing gets you excited every single day?
I love beating out my competition. I'm a very competitive person. But also I love receiving emails, which I got one right before we got on, is thank you so much for finally getting me approved. Beautiful. And that's a big issue, especially in unique verticals like CBD for this example, because a lot of banks still don't know it. They haven't taken time to educate. There's a lot of commission generating sales reps with my competition that just, again, tell you what you want to hear to get you off the street, which means have you stop looking around for other companies.
Interesting.
But, they're sending you to a place that would never consider approving you, but they don't know what CBD is. They just consider you a supplement. so that's a big, a couple big things is, hearing that I've solved a problem, is maybe my engineering, my indirect engineering background, that I get from my father. But, really it's definitely solving problems that I love hearing. And I always love beating out the competition. I think they got the right deal when I come in and undercut pricing in it by half. So it's a couple of those things there.
That's great. Love getting those kind of emails. Perfect. So tell me, what's your drink of choice in the morning? Do you have a drink of choice?
Not to be, one of those weightlifting guys, but it's definitely, espresso in the morning. And then after the workout, it's a protein shake.
Nice. And keeps you going the rest of the day?
I could probably have 7 or 8 espressos. I don't even think it would give me any energy, but it's, I don't know if that's good or bad with how my body is, but yeah, I know it's good enough energy. I'm naturally energetic or crazy to an extent, how you look at it, but it's passion in life. You got to appreciate things.
That's great. So besides the job that you're doing today, besides the company that you have today, Vector Payments, if you weren't doing that, what would you be doing?
To be honest with you, I always thought I would be, in finance or Wall Street or something, which is probably a good thing. Wall Street and payment companies, I think people hate them both equally, but it's always something I enjoy. I mean, I enjoy stocks and now crypto, which is creeping up to be in the same discussion every day now. But probably that, but I'm a diehard sports guy. I love football. I'm a diehard Miami Hurricanes fan. So I guess if there's something I would have done in another career choice is to probably be a sports agent or, be something affiliated with sports.
Wow.
Not to give the generic, response out there from a sports fan, but it was something like sportscaster or sports agent I was always looking at.
I love it. I was just listening to a podcast with Joe Buck. And he's funny. He's raw on the podcast. He's very polished. I love the world of a good sportscaster is just worth its weight. They're worth their weight in gold. He's
amazing. The best. I mean, listen, he's the primetime guy for Fox and everything, whether it's World Series or, when World Series was going back to back with, with football, he'd be doing the World Series and then he'd fly do Thursday night football, then go back to the World Series, then fly back for Sunday afternoon football. So, I don't think a lot of people appreciate him as much as they should. I definitely prefer him over, some of the other guys like Tony Romo made a huge splash, a couple of years ago, but I think he's really started to fall off after he got that $10 million a year contract. So, imagine how that works.
Yeah, exactly. Well, if you haven't listened to Joe Buck's podcast, Daddy Issues, it's a great podcast. It's really, really good. It'll make you laugh. Definitely make you laugh.
Note. I'll add it to the list. That's good. I like those.
Absolutely. Well, here's your final question. What is your go-to SaaS software? What's the piece of software that you just can't live without?
Well, as a business owner, we're lead Salesforce. Salesforce is there. HubSpot is one that I'm gradually starting to learn a little bit more and switch over. But, Salesforce I've used since day one at my past life, with my first organization and now carrying over to Vector Payments. So I would say it's probably Salesforce from a business operational standpoint that's out there. Traditional life, nothing crazy, nothing crazy out there. So I would say probably Salesforce and HubSpot are my main two.
That's great. Well, maybe sometime we can just talk offline about Salesforce. I'd love to, I've honestly never even used it before. HubSpot I've played around with, and, we're always also looking for, we've used so many different ones. Now we have a tailor-made type of CRM and lead generation system, but I'm fascinated with that world. So that's really interesting and great. And I can see how valuable it can be. Well, this has been, seriously, Ryan, an absolute pleasure having you on. This is, to me, again, this topic is, while it's not sexy, it's fascinating. There's so many parts to it, so many different stakeholders in the process. And again, so many unknowns where the education comes in. And I think that, you do such an incredible job. I'm so happy that we met you and that we started doing business together. And, I hope we do business for a long time to come. And I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day today to come on and educate and entertain our listeners and our viewers for this podcast. So thank you very much for doing this.
Feelings are mutual, Ramin. I appreciate it, man. And definitely likewise, and building a lot of business. And any questions, anybody has, I'm an open book, so Don't worry if it's something you think is basic. Don't worry if it's something you think you should know. Because the reality of it is you're not in the industry. So you really shouldn't know. That's
Sure.
where our job comes in. If I was buying something from you or needing your services, you're the pro at what you do. I'm the pro at what I do. So I value your opinion and professionalism and vice versa. So no, I really appreciate the opportunity and happy to help anybody you guys know and keep things simple, simplifying the process as we discussed here.
Yes, as your tagline. So if somebody wants to reach out and talk to you, reach out and learn more about Vector Payments, just give them, let them know where to go.
Yeah, I mean, you can go to my website. It's Vector Payments. It's V as in Victor, EC as in Charlie, T as in Tom, OR Payments with an S.com. My email is simply Ryan, RYAN, @vectorpayments.com. And obviously, if you'd rather just have, an intro from the SKU agency team, by all means, they're used to that by now as well. But, seriously, when I say it, I am an open book and, I'm always happy to help people. It's true, because we both work together to drive business and hopefully, unite our country again and keep things moving the right direction that made it as great as it is to this day. And let's keep things moving forward and stop worrying about pointing fingers at everybody. So, I'm looking forward to that. I'll tell you that much.
No, I love it. I love it. And yes, it is a great country. And being that I've been in another country and, that country is wonderful, has a lot of wonderful things, but, I love being here. I'm glad I ended up here. So I appreciate that you share those same sentiments. So it's great. It's fantastic. And we'll go ahead and put those in the show notes, put all the links in the show notes so everybody can reach out to you. So again, thank you. And, if you're open to it, love to have you on again because we could dive into so many niches in terms of payment processing. So if you're open to that, love to do it again.
Yeah, I'd love to. Absolutely. Education's key. If people can be more educated and something they have no idea about, and same with yourself about payments, as you mentioned, you love hearing and learning. I'm the same way in unique pieces because knowledge is power, as they say. So the more that you know, the more you can grow. And, that's really what we're all trying to do here.
Perfect. Beautifully said. Beautifully said. So thank you again.
This is just the beginning.
If you enjoyed this episode of the E-Commerce Revolution podcast, please subscribe to our channel on YouTube or drop us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thank you very much.